In order for the podcast to continue, I really need more guests to volunteer to be on the show. So if you're interested, or if you know someone who is interested, please go to gocorral.com/STS to learn more about how to apply to be on the show. That's GOCORRAL.com/STS. Today I'm here with James, who's going to talk with us about Quelmar. Hi, James.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Yeah, so first let's hear about who you are outside of D&D.
Sure. So my name is James Ruth. I am, first off, as a person, as a human being, I'm a guy. I am a millennial, which is it's an awkward generation to be in this hobby. We're not quite the old Grognard guard. We're not we're not from the 80s, and then we're also not in this the Gen Z generation. I feel like they've grown up with RPGs being cool again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think us millennials have to sort of live with the fact that we lived through it not being popular, and then we got to watch it get really popular alongside it.
Yeah, I feel like people get a lot of exposure just from video games now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
from video games, from Critical Role, I'll talk a little bit about theater too, but even in the theater scene,
mm-hmm.
it's showing up a lot. But besides that, speaking of theater, I am by trade. I am an actor. I prefer theater artist over actor only because I do a lot of work on all sides of the table. So I've done directing and I've done design work.
Yeah, I saw your resume. It seemed like you don't really have a traditional role that you do within the theater production.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I started like a lot of theater kids in high school. I just sort of started as an actor, but
mm-hmm.
over time, I learned through my own training and work professionally that you gotta do everything at least once to get a respect for everybody in the room and what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've also found that in doing that, the acting part isn't necessarily my catch-all, be-all. I still primarily act, but any opportunity to do anything else, I will still jump on. And so really, I consider myself a theater artist. I'm just around to make theater happen in all sorts of shapes and forms, which is a terrible lifestyle. It makes very little money, even when you've opened yourself up to every opportunity.
Oh man, yeah.
So also to sort of make ends meet, some people will know me just as a techie, as a computer guy. I've done some programming work in the past. I did IT help desks and stuff years ago. So I've got a fair bit of experience in that sector, which I think a lot of D&D people, a lot of RPG people come from
mm-hmm.
the computer science and technical world.
Yeah, definitely. And the theater world too.
Yeah, exactly. It's certainly, I live in that intersection, and so does tabletop RPGs. So we get along well, me and TTRPGs.
Yeah, I was thinking of a joke in my head when I saw your resume of asking, like usually I ask who you are outside of D&D. I was thinking of asking what your day job was as a sort of, you're probably used to that joke.
Yeah. I mean, it's, role playing is basically my day job. You can kind of think of it like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, cool. How did you get started playing D&D?
The earliest memories I have of D&D are definitely, as a millennial. That means I grew up in the 90s, and having been a child of the 90s, watching cartoons, there's a great Dexter's Laboratory episode. Dexter's Lab did an episode all about D&D, him, the big nerd he is. If you're unfamiliar with the show, God forbid, maybe you are.
Well, I know it, but you can tell for people listening if you'd like.
For people much older or much younger than us, it's a show about a little kid who is a super genius. And all of his nerdy friends and his nerdy inventions. It's like Jimmy Neutron was another show that did sort of that trope later.
Yeah, well, only like 5 years later. It wasn't that far apart.
Maybe I think you might be right. They might be closer in time than I even remember it being. But
we want to go further back. Family Matters was kind of the same.
That's right. The original. We got to go back to Urkel. That's now we're talking. But it's so I remember D&D being ingrained in my mind from that episode from a young age, but I never got into it until much later. In fact, I So the year's 2012, and I don't know why or how I got to this point, but somehow on YouTube, of all places, there like the autoplay or the suggested video was a D&D game. It was actually, if you're curious, you want to do the archaeology of it, it was the Acquisitions Incorporated live play from one of the PAXs, either that year or the year before.
Mm-hmm.
So I find myself watching this in my freshman dorm,
Mm-hmm.
and the funny thing about those PAX live plays that Chris Perkins and the Ack Inc. group did was that they were so much larger than life and done for the biggest hall at the convention.
Mm-hmm.
You know, huge, almost stadium-like audience to watch these people play, and they played on, this is Critical Role before Critical Role. They had
Right.
the absolute highest production sets and costumes and special effects and fogs and everything. And I'm in college for theater at the time, so I'm watching this and I go, oh my God, this is theater. I love what these guys are doing and how much fun they're having. And so something clicked watching the old Ack Inc. videos that I go, this is something I want to look at because I'm a theater guy and I know a lot of theater people and I bet this is going to be a ton of fun. And
Yeah.
nobody I knew, at least in my closest circles, was doing it. The year was 2012. So if you're somebody like me who sort of thinks in memories, like where was I at that time as opposed to years, this would have been right really at the heart of the old Pathfinder 3.5 fourth edition. There was just sort of a struggle of like, do we stay on 3.5? Do we jump to 3.75, which was Pathfinder?
Mm-hmm.
Do we keep playing fourth edition, which a lot of people didn't like?
Yeah. There was an edition war similar to like the OGL license thing. Like, that kind of sort of sparked a lot of people leaving D&D for alternatives. And I feel like fourth edition kind of had that same just because so many people didn't like it.
That's exactly right. It was the same deal. It's the same way we're getting all these copycat games right now. Kobold Press, they've got a game called...
That's right. Yeah. It's coming out soon.
Yeah. The name's slipping my mind, but in a similar way to Kobold Press is doing their big game. Paizo did that exact same thing for fourth edition. And, and history repeats itself. It's weird when you're in the hobby long enough to watch history repeat itself like
Isn't
this.
Critical Role doing that too, actually? Coming out
They
with their own
did. They've
system?
got the Illuminated World system. That's Candela Obscura. So that was their...
Right.
They jumped ship off of D&D as well. And so the fourth that period in time when it was happening for fourth edition and Pathfinder and all that, that's when I decided as a freshman I'm going to get into D&D.
Mm-hmm. So who did you play with initially? Was there like a group? This is when you were in college, or?
Yeah. So freshman year of college, you have you're a young guy. You've got your guy friends, your squad, your gang, the boys.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, I didn't know anybody else who did play, and so tale as old as time. That means it's my job to figure out how to run this thing, and so I get into DMing, and it was just it was four of my close childhood friends. Some of them were like freshmen in high school still, because some of them were younger than I was. So it's a pretty stereotypical, a bunch of grungy, barely post-pubescent teenagers getting into D&D in a basement. We were in my mother's basement.
Perfect.
On a converted pool table. With that, it's such a fun story. But I wanted a table to play D&D on, and all we had was a pool table in the basement. So my mom went out to Home Depot with me, and we ordered giant, like 4x6 board. Took it home. My older brother cut it down to the right dimensions. It was a family endeavor building this table for me.
Uh-huh. Well, actually, I think pool tables are great to play on because the dice don't roll off. You just need to block the pockets.
That's true. If I was any more clever and I knew how to block the pockets, we might have done that. But I think we just wound up blocking, just putting a whole big board on top.
We just put like a soda can in the pool table that we played on.
God, that's so much smarter. And that was the start. That was where Quelmar began, was in that basement.
Was that your first campaign? Was Quelmar?
Yeah, Quelmar is it's been my first. I'd probably even feel comfortable saying it's been my only world, my only campaign. 10 years later,
Mm-hmm.
not that I haven't played in other worlds, not that I haven't explored other campaigns campaigns set in other worlds or places,
Uh-huh.
Eberron, Forgotten Realms, a lot of the classics. I got really into Kryn at one point. That's the Dragonlance
Right,
world.
right.
But Quelmar, maybe there's something to be said about sticking to Quelmar and the success that it's had by choosing to continue in one world as opposed to creating new specialized worlds for each story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, suiting the story to the world and not the world to the story.
Yeah, I see what you mean there. Yeah, like if you want to run like a zombie apocalypse game, usually people would choose a different world than one that they're used to, just because it feels
Yeah,
destructive.
that's exactly right. And for some reason, whoever's idea it was probably it was my idea. But as we started to run more and more campaigns, it was just like, okay, how can we make this campaign work in Quelmar? And then by building so many different campaigns of different types into the same world, we watched this world grow and expand and evolve uh, through time and through space, and we learn a lot about it. It sort of becomes a character in and of itself,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
all good settings. Um, but I mean, I guess I should probably actually introduce the world we'll be talking about. I feel like I might be getting it up myself.
Yeah, I'm debating. I think we should talk more about like what it's grown into as an organization before we talk about like the actual campaign world
Yeah,
itself.
yeah. So here, so going back to who are you outside of D&D? Um, I am also one thing I take a lot of pride in is that in recent years I can officially wear the charity founder pin, which I very humbly wear, declaring it for the World Wide Web to listen to. But we turned Quelmar 10 years on into an organization dedicated to using the power of creativity and writing and world building as a tool for uh, enriching and building community in person. So Quelmar has effectively chapters or places where Quelmar players are.
By chapter, you mean like a union chapter, right?
It is kind of like a union chapter.
Yeah.
I don't think they have they might now, but when I was on the board, they didn't quite have union chapter names yet, but the idea was, there was a group of people in Pennsylvania who all ran Quelmar stuff, and a group of people in Maryland who all ran Quelmar stuff, and a group
Right.
of people and there was California, Michigan, uh, overseas. Well, not technically. Yeah, no, actually overseas. That's right. The Quell Jammer campaign was played in Scotland.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, little chapters. Some of them are just like one person in their table. It might be 6 or 7 people, but they are like playing and setting stories in Quelmar, world building in Quelmar, and as being part of the larger Quelmar organization of world builders and storytellers, that meant that they had access to any sort of resources that the official charity could provide. And that includes things like a lending library, miniatures or dice or books or pencils. Quelmar took care of its own in that way, but as a nonprofit, we expanded uh, our sort of reach to everything locally. So the local libraries in towns, schools, local festivals or conventions, game stores were a big thing. We
Hmm.
we would go and show up to game stores, and we'd be able to support them um, by hosting events and advertising them and helping bring people into the stores. Uh, so in a way, we became a group dedicated to helping anyone, no matter who they were, what background they came from, uh, what troubles they had in life, economic status, no matter what. We
Hmm.
wanted to make sure they had every tool they needed to successfully um, meet people, make friends, enjoy the hobby itself. And even if the hobby's not the most fun to them, at least have accessibility and availability to show up to events and socialize and connect with people. We use the tabletop as our platform, but the goal is friendships and connections and communities and enriching, just making everybody's lives better
Hmm.
through the power of play.
Yeah, there's been like on Reddit, occasionally someone will post something that's like, "Oh, I have a friend that shows up to play but doesn't seem very engaged in the game." Well, it's because they're showing up to hang out with you and not to play the game.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I know tons of people who they love Quelmar, but the games themselves, they're like, okay, sure, I'm a fighter. I'm a human fighter.
Hmm.
But then they're just so excited to be out and to have um, there is this idea. I'll sort of step in a little philosophical here, but there's this
Yeah.
famous idea of the third place or the third space,
Hmm.
which is in like sociology, they say everybody in the world has a home space and everybody in the world has like a workspace, a place where they work or they make their money.
Hmm.
Um, and then traditionally, there has been a third space for people. And the big example I love to use is Cheers, is a show about a third space. It's just a bar, but what it is to all of the people, all the characters in Cheers, is a place where you can go and everybody knows your name. A place where you don't have to feel like you're making money and you don't have to feel like you're just stuck at home, but you can relax, be yourself, be welcomed and loved, uh, and your life, increases in quality because you aren't just at home or at work or at home or at work or at home and at work. And third spaces for a lot of people are game stores. Third spaces for a lot of people are libraries. Third spaces are, community centers. And
Hmm. And Europe, there's like the plaza is one that's pretty common for cities. Um,
yes, exactly.
the
So,
quad, like for colleges, is another one. Yeah.
Quelmar's goal is, in a lot of ways, to help people rediscover their third space.
Yeah, that's really cool. Um, One of the things that I've seen people talk about when they're talking about third spaces is trying to make them more accessible because a lot of them now end up being places that you have to spend money to access. Like the
Yeah.
bar in Cheers is, as an example. Um, yeah, it's a third space, but you got to
Oh
pay to be
yeah.
there. um,
Yeah, and that's exactly right. That's exactly what they do over at Quelmar. They've got, for instance, people love having 3D printed minis these days.
mhm,
Quelmar has a set of 3D printers in the organization that people will just send files to. Quelmar will print them out, send them back. You shouldn't have to feel like you have to pay money or buy a machine or have the education to get this thing. If it's something you want and it's a barrier to play, then we will help you get that.
that's pretty cool. My local game store has a 3D printer now, so you can do the same thing
Yeah,
with them. It's pretty cool.
exactly, exactly. But Quelmar, it's even though it's an organization legally, quote unquote, the Quelmar Realm TM is a nonprofit organization. To me, the Quelmar Realm, not TM, is always going to be this little shoddy map that I drew freshman year of college.
Hmm.
Um, the world that everything sort of grew out of.
Well, I had a few more questions about the organization. I guess first one, you mentioned like game stores, libraries, schools for places that you do outreach to. Um, I feel like other places that actually really appreciate that kind of RPG insertion is the military and prisons. Is there anything that the organization does for those, or?
Yeah, I can't speak to the current state of the organization. For full disclosure, I am not on Quelmar's board. I am basically a community member at this point. I'm still a fan and I'm still around. Um, but I moved out of where one of our chapters I'm in Minnesota now and we don't have any chapters here,
Uh-huh.
and I felt it was fair that I stepped down from any sort of position of like the board or anything because I was not in a place where I could necessarily make a lot of change.
Mhm.
Um, Now that's sort of the temporary status. I was on the founding board, and that was a year and a half ago. So I'm in a very transitional period in my life right now. Uh, all of that to say, I don't think Quelmar has anything with prisons right now, or if they're planning something with prisons, I'm not privy to it.
Uh-huh.
I know that when I was on the board, there was definitely some conversation about prison RPGs. There's an amazing website, a writer who actually specifically writes RPGs meant to be played in prisons.
Oh, okay.
Um, and we had a member of the community who was a prison guard. And so we started talks with him. His name's Kyle. He's an amazing game master. He's run campaigns in Quelmar.
Okay, cool.
He has he's still around. If you're listening, Kyle, hey. Uh, but uh, but I know we had talks and they didn't come to fruition when I was there. I can't say if it's not something Quelmar will ever do. It's just not something that I know right now it does.
Yeah,
Um,
I've heard that prisons are kind of against it because dice are often used for gambling, and they're trying to
that
prevent
was
that.
part of the conversation with Kyle. Was we came to Kyle and we said, these are some really awesome things. Do you think we can start talking about looking at doing this in the local prison? And Kyle said pretty much to that extent was something about how it wasn't. It was something that the prisoners might have enjoyed, but they had a lot of really strict regulations on whether or not that was gambling and
Hmm.
whether or not it would even be allowed.
Yeah, yeah, that's always the tough part, convincing that it's not gambling. We're not doing that. This is
Yeah. I think that's something that we can work on. Quelmar as a nonprofit has only been around for 2 years now, so we're still in our very, very early days.
mhm.
I'll say, oh God, I'm going to keep doing this. I do say we, again, disclaimer. Uh, I am a Quelmar community member. I am not a Quelmar board member, but I will continue to. This is what we need to do. We just need to put like an insert at the top of the interview that's like, note: the views of James Ruth are representative of his own views and are not representative of the Quelmar organization in any way. Uh,
Of
so,
course.
but I'll use the royal we. That's not how that's used. I'll use the unroyal we, where I'll say we, speaking of the organization as if I was a board member, but I'm a consultant. I'm a founder. I'm in a weird position, is
Mhm.
what it is.
Yeah, no,
A lot of
I
people
understand.
will still come to me and talk to me and consult me. As the person who invented the world and as the person who spearheaded all of the initiatives and got all of this running. Um, there's certainly a sort of legacy element to my involvement in the community. But
Mhm.
I have really enjoyed using this opportunity, this having moved and now being a little removed, to sort of sit back and watch uh, the community succeed and being able to root for them and watch their successes and cheer for everything that everything awesome that they do from an outside perspective is that's it's I don't know, it's transcendental. It's an interesting feeling to watch change in the world happen, all based on world building, all based on creating a world and a story for a tabletop game.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool to create something and then have it sort of grow beyond your control.
Yeah, they are what we grow. What is Yoda has a quote in episode 7 or episode 8, which was like they are what we grow beyond. They grow beyond what we are, something like that.
Yeah, must be 8. He's not in 7.
Yes. Um, that's exactly right. Quelmar sort of grew beyond me, and um, I can speak to all of my experience on the board running it, and I can speak to the 10 years of building up the organization to the point that it reached what it was. But you might find sometimes today during this interview, during this podcast, I might be like, I don't know, they're doing some cool stuff over there that I don't know everything about because that's them. They're doing their thing. Um,
Yeah, well, let's talk about like how it grew from being just like your game into the wider organization because I feel like we skipped over that part
sure.
of the story.
Yeah. No, that's where it's that's the fun part, I guess. So the Quelmar realm, it started like probably every other dang homebrew world ever in the world, which was um I got nothing. I'm gonna draw a map, and this is where we're gonna set our little homebrew story. And we're gonna invent things as we go along on the fly with a couple of buds in a basement. Um,
Right?
that's really normal. That's a story I've heard 1,000 times from 1,000 people. Um, what really helped Quelmar take off was it's sort of twofold. So the first thing was that the second campaign that was ever run in Quelmar, it was called Towson Tabletop. Towson is the name of a university in Maryland that I went to.
Okay.
And so it was the tabletop campaign for the Towson. It wasn't just the theater department. It started as just a few friends in the theater department, and then it grew beyond the theater department. But the idea with Towson Tabletop was that I got really ambitious early on, and I said, I'm going to run this second campaign for my college friends, not my home friends, my childhood buddies. And what started as 5 of us, we're all hanging out on campus after the game a couple days later, and they're talking about the game and they're excited, and then they're like, "Oh, you should come play. You should come play. You should come play." And so people keep inviting friends to play, and me absolutely out of my league and having no idea how any of this works. I didn't know even what a West Marches was, as I was accidentally sort of stumbling into the West Marches model.
Right.
The Towson Tabletop campaign wound up having, I'll give you an accurate number.
I'm pulling it up here too.
Yeah, the Towson Tabletop campaign had 48 players by the end of it, and just one DM, just me.
Oh, jeez.
48 players and me, and 79 characters, because of course, some of them die. So over those 65 sessions, it was just a snowball effect of more and more people joining and more people wanting to join. And just like with that first home campaign, my approach to world building was, hey, you're going to invent this character. Tell me about where they're from and what they do. A lot of theater people are involved in it. So we sort of leaned in on that improv aspect. We were all kind of quick on our feet to be able to improv and build on top of it. Yes, and. So in a very traditional world building way, it was just all 48 people bringing something new to the table and everybody else going, yes, and then we play this fun logic game of how do we make all of these stories work and where and how. One player, actually, I'll probably use real names where I can because I want to give credit where credit is due. Quelmar was built by hundreds and hundreds of people. And so this world belongs to them just as much as, it belongs to me or anyone else. So one player, Haley decided to build an island nation. I didn't invent an island nation when I made the map. So we go, okay, there's an island nation. Boop.
Yep.
One player comes to the table, Rose comes to the table and says, I want to be a monkey person because I think that's funny and I like monkeys.
Okay.
And so, great. All right, there's monkey people in Quelmar, and she points to a part of the map that's near where the campaign is. So we go, all right, this part of the map that we haven't touched, near where the adventure is happening so that you can hop on over to the adventure. This is now where a bunch of monkey people are.
Did this person have a role in Wicked before playing in your campaign?
Did they have a role? Yeah. Yes. No. I'm not really sure where the monkey stuff came from. Rose built Atman the Water Monkey as a tribute to Katara because Avatar: The Last Airbender was obviously just as big then as it was now.
Yeah.
So she was that character was a water sage, a water magician, effectively a water bender, but then also a monkey. And so monkeys came to Quelmar, and that's how we got the Venara race.
Okay.
So you take that idea and you multiply it by 48. You throw in the original campaign on top of that, and so by the end of Quelmar's second campaign, you're looking at a world collaboratively built by 55 or so people, all bringing very different and unique ideas. And it was that made me go, oh, this is cool because people are feeling inspired to write, and they love reading what their friends are writing, and they love playing this game where they build their lore into the existing lore and they find puzzle pieces to slot themselves into the world. Again, none of this is entirely new or unique, but just the scale we did it at and the speed we did it at. So Towson Tabletop was like a year into Quelmar's existence. We're talking like 2014 now. So all of these people doing it all so quickly created the foundation of what Quelmar would become. It would become a world. At that point, it was just decided, we're not going to do world building for world building's sake. We're not going to go in here like a lot of people, and probably a lot of people you're going to have on this podcast, um, go in and they write up the world. They invent the stuff ahead of time. They build these kingdoms and they create these mountains and they draw these rivers and they establish the world and the lore so that people rightfully, I think this is also a equally amazing way to world build, step into this world and it's been written and it's lively and you already feel like it's so three-dimensional because so much has been written and done ahead of time. With Quelmar, we just wound up taking that reverse approach, which was we're going to give you the blank slate, you tell us about the world, and we'll make it come to life.
Yeah, the dungeon world style is what it is.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. So the spark notes of it is that you take that idea, you fast forward another 50 campaigns or so, some of them larger than Towson Tabletop.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Luckily, by that point in time, the idea of multiple DMs did come to fruition. So
good.
Towson Tabletop, I think, was the largest campaign run by a single person. But after that, if it was like more than 50 people, we definitely made sure. I think it was more than like 30 people. We definitely made sure there was more than one game master on it.
Man, I feel like, most people don't like running more than 5 people at their table.
Yeah. When it comes to
at the same time, I guess that's different. But.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the thing is that because Quelmar becomes this flexible canvas, you get a lot of people who do run their personal campaigns. In fact, Quelmar's campaigns are split up. We've got a Quelmar wiki, quelmarwiki.com. It's broken up. We've got the community campaigns is what we call them, which are the big, just like Towson Tabletop, 50 or more people. Mm-hmm. We've got open table campaigns, which are a relatively new thing. They came out after I kind of left. I think the idea is that they are people who aren't necessarily running stories about the characters, but more like they're running a story about an event or a place, and characters are welcome to come and jump into the story and jump out. Mm-hmm. So they're really nice and flexible for schedules and stuff. And when every time you jump into an open table campaign, you'll probably be with different players. But the idea is that it's not like the community campaigns, because in the community campaigns, sort of like I alluded to, you bring your section of lore to the world, and then that becomes part of the story. Mm-hmm. If you have a nemesis that's chasing you through the wilds, and you come and join a community campaign, jump to a couple months later, you and all these people you've gotten to meet and know, these characters, are going to fight your nemesis with you.
Gotcha.
So the open table campaigns might sort of feel like they're community campaigns, but they're not really. They're like
It seems like a pickup game at like a game store.
Yeah, it's a pickup game. It's yeah. I think they still sort of tell one big story, but it's really more like a pickup game. Yeah. You just sort of jump in when you want. And then the last two types that we have are both sort of the same thing. They are the personal tables. They are like my very first table. It's a personal game. It was just the couple of us, the 4 of us. And then ever since COVID, which I'll say that COVID was a boon to Quelmar because people played so much more tabletop games over COVID.
Yeah, there was a lot of people that were like, well, I'm stuck at home. I might as well do something with some friends, and it was the way to do it.
That's exactly right. So Quelmar started their first broadcast campaign, which we put on Twitch in January of 2020, which is pre-COVID, but only barely.
Depending on where you are.
It was an idea, before COVID hit America, before we thought about the pandemic ever being a thing. We started like it was going to just be a normal idea we were going to bring to Quelmar, and then it devoured Quelmar because once COVID hit, everybody wanted to play. Everybody's playing online, and a lot of people are like, well, since we're playing online, why don't we do a Twitch thing and people can watch us? Because, as the community grew, you find that there are people in the community who are invested and want to watch other games, who want to learn more about the world or just enjoy other stories separate from the ones that they're playing in.
Right.
It's that cinematic universe thing. Even though I'm telling this story in this land, I want to learn about this story happening in this other land in the same world that my story's happening,
Well, when I was recording, what my players would do is just like if you missed a session, it was a great way to figure out what had happened. You just I mean, they wouldn't necessarily watch it. They would just like, put it on as an audio YouTube thing.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Um, so we've got a ton of those small tables you were talking about. They are essential to keeping the community alive, I'd argue, because one of Quelmar's missions is to help you make friends. But then once you've made these friends, what do? Oh, well, we all like tabletop games, so let's run a Quelmar campaign. We're all here, we all like Quelmar,
Uh-huh.
and then boom, you've got 4 or 5 people who've now spun off and started an adventure.
So how
Um,
did it expand beyond, because this was something you started in college, how did it expand beyond like your own Maryland center? Was it just like people spread out from there after they graduated?
Uh, some of it, yes. We've had some campaigns that were people from Towson who just, after college decided to start Quelmar stories with their own local friends. Um, and the big thing that elevated us from, a rather large West Marches personal campaign with some buddies and buddies and the buddies of those buddies
Hmm.
into what really kicked us off into the direction of the nonprofit was that right after COVID got out. So even as recently as like 2019, Quelmar was still primarily like a web that started at me and was like my friends and then my friends' friends and then my friends' friends.
Hmm.
And then right after COVID ended, game stores opened up again and game stores wanted to bring people in. And I saw a need for, and I also felt a need to go into game stores and wanting to play in game stores again. Um, and so I devised, it was sort of a secret mission where I went to both of the game stores in my town separately, and I told them that I was going to run, campaigns in their game stores. Can I put these sign up sheets up? Sure, sure. I didn't quite get their permission, but I don't think they really had a problem with it. But
Yeah.
it was one campaign that I'd be jumping stores with back and forth. That in my head was because I loved both stores a lot, but game stores have uh, loyalty. They have followers. They have people who love this store and they don't care for that store.
Well, it's rare that you have like a small, even a mid-sized town that can support two game stores.
Yeah, exactly. And we only had the two. And so they had their followings, they had their base. And my idea was just inspired by the fact that Quelmar brings people together. I was like, I bet if I run a big campaign like Towson Tabletop again and I run it at both stores, I'm going to break these barriers and I'm going to help people who love this game store one. I'm going to have them come and play in game store two or vice versa. And it worked. I mean, it, the big thing was that it started to bring in a lot of outsiders, people I didn't quite know, just game store locals. And I got to know more and more people in my community of State College, Pennsylvania, and I learned it was also the first time that like previously Quelmar I would have personally described as like a theater group primarily
Uh-huh.
of tabletop gamers because it started from theater. But then once we hit this game store chapter of Quelmar, you get everybody. You get people from all over backgrounds and types and sorts. And it was amazing to watch a lot of the theater part of Quelmar, people who love to act and role play,
Right.
Now sit at these tables with some of the more less experienced and maybe even a little shy local players who they like D&D. Maybe they loved Critical Role is a big thing by now, so but they themselves are not quite ready to start acting and get into it that much. And so you bring a lot of theater people to the table, a lot of supportive theater people to the table, and you get to watch people open up and blossom and turn into these incredible role players. And you watch how in opening up it's almost like you like people more, or you bond with people more when you role play together and you can see the joy in their eyes. Like if you enjoy something and they enjoy it and you guys can both make dumb voices and faces and swing imaginary weapons across the table and just get real silly and absolutely engage
Hmm.
in the craft of role playing. it just helps immediately open up even some of the quiet, most shy people into being some of the funniest, enjoyable, lovable people. I've made so many great friends in Quelmar that without the tabletop experience, I, may have just sort of written off as that quiet guy in the game store, always in the corner, you know,
Hmm.
not necessarily for any reason other than, I'm doing my thing, he's doing his thing. But like now, by the end of that process, I walked into the game store and I knew every person in the room, no matter, and they started to know each other more, um, no matter where they came from or who they were, and everybody had something to share and bond over.
Yeah, I think it's sort of this like positive chain reaction. Once someone is being happy and getting into it, other people will respond in the same way. And I mean, it's not just role playing. Like every shared experience is like that. Like
Yeah,
watching
exactly.
a comedy by yourself isn't very fun, but you watch it with 10 people and it's a much better experience.
Hmm. No, that's exactly right. And these are all the things I slowly but surely discovered more and more as Quelmar grew into being a local. We call them community campaigns now because they are like community outreach programs.
Hmm.
They are open to everyone and anyone who wants to join. And the people who join, we engage with and we invite and we create a safe space for them to explore the hobby, um, without that fear of, oh, this there's uh, you know there are barriers. There are absolutely barriers to this hobby in that you might come into a game store and want to learn to play D&D, but everybody you see playing D&D, at least maybe on that day or every day that week or every time you come in, might be the grognard crowd. They might be a bunch of 50, 60
Hmm.
year old men, white men, who have got their thing going and it's good for them. And you try to play with them and it feels like you're not part of the group. Um, and it's not for any specific reason. I'm not saying they're bad people or you're a bad person, but when there's like a meaty, like a middle meat, a matchmaker of sorts who's just here to bring in all the grognards. We love them, we respect them. We if they come and play, we will inject their games with the stuff that they love.
Yeah, I was thinking like you're running a swords campaign and trying to introduce that to someone who learned D&D from watching Critical Role. It's like it's not it doesn't quite mesh.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's part of Quelmar's job, was just helping make these separate crowds, these disparate crowds, have a place that they can meet and unite and find that shared ground. And it's done wonders for it did wonders for State College. We'll see if it does wonders for uh, any of the other chapters right now, because we're sort of, those programs are spreading. It's a more recent invention, the community
Right.
campaign. Like I said, we went public about 2 years ago, and that was based on the back of starting these community campaigns. So if you break down the 10 years of Quelmar, it's like 7 years of more traditional friends of friends, and then 3 years of just sort of exploding and realizing that this world is bigger than us. This world can be shared. This world can be used as a tool to bring people together.
Right.
Um, and so I'm excited for this next 10 years of Quelmar, and to see what other communities besides State College that it uh, helps grow and bring together.
And who are you playing with yourself now? Because you're not as much part of the organization anymore.
It's true. It's true. So right now, my current chapter of Quelmar is, as always, a bridge builder, a matchmaker. I started, I guess it would have been at the top of the year in January or February.
Hmm.
Um, so a lot of my ideas just kind of hit me in the shower. It's when I
Typical.
feel like all my, yeah, creative energies just sort of flow out of my head, and at one shower sometime in January, I realized we've got 55 campaigns set in this world, across 3,000 years of history, across 7 or 8 continents,
Hmm.
um, and I was like, we should do something to demonstrate the connectedness of this universe. We've got so many amazing stories being told. Let's let's build a project that connects them.
All right.
Let's be the Nick Fury to the Avengers of Quelmar.
I was thinking, yeah.
And so, starting in February, I launched a series of one shots, an anthology called Just the Q of Us, where I take one character from one campaign and one character from a completely different campaign. No crossover or overlap or anything. So you've got two individuals that exist in the Quelmar universe.
All right.
And we tell a story, a 3 or 4 hour game. That's just, it demonstrates where these campaigns sort of brushed up against each other. Where in time or space did these stories have an opportunity to just, coexist?
Ah, okay. So it's like a snapshot for both of them, somewhat.
It is. It's sort of a chance to. It's a character study, is what I tell people, because it's only 2 players.
Mm-hmm.
It's a chance to take an old character from an old campaign, and give them the spotlight, show them off a little more,
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, especially for some of these older campaigns, I'm bringing, like, we've literally got Towson tabletop characters coming back, 10 years later in this. It's also kind of a history lesson for the newer classes of Quelmar. We've got people, who've joined Quelmar that were like in pre-K when Towson tabletop was happening. So it's like, okay, well, Kaya here is playing Esimal, the wizard from Towson tabletop. If you're interested in this, and you like Kaya, you like the story that Kaya is telling, go look up Towson tabletop.
Okay. So yeah, kind of like the crossover comics for X-Men and Spider-Man. That happened a lot.
That's exactly right. It is. I wasn't gonna say it, but it is the Marvel team up of the Quelmar universe. It is just an anthology of crossover episodes, that have been also for me a fun. I love diving into Quelmar's lore because I am always learning about Quelmar. It's. I will say this is something a little more unique to the world builder creator process of Quelmar compared to other people, is that even though I created Quelmar, I am always learning new stuff about Quelmar, because every time I go check the wiki or I dive into the Discord channel or whatever, I'm seeing all this new stuff being invented by people and brought to the world, and I am using Just the Q of Us as an exercise in finding the links. So they have to be, my personal rule is that they have to be encounters that absolutely are feasible. I can't just grab 2 people from any 2 campaigns and be like, portals open up and you cross over. It has to be natural. It has to be organic. We had 2 campaigns. This was the episode we just had this past week. 2 campaigns that were told in Barovia, right? 2 people wanted to do a Sword of Strahd campaign. So we had 2 stories happening in Barovia at 2 different times in Quelmar's history. If you're curious, neither group killed Strahd. Neither group succeeded. He's still out there, which means that Barovia is still anyone's guess. If you want to come and tell the successful story of who actually takes down Strahd in Quelmar, it's anyone's to take.
Right.
But those 2 campaigns, they never crossed paths or anything. They were there at different times and places, and so I reached out to both of the game masters of those stories, and we had a little mind meld where I talked with both Tyler, who ran a campaign called Another One Bites the Dice, and Craig, who is our Scottish fellow who ran the Scotland campaign.
Right.
Craig ran a campaign called Not Strahd, because the gist was, we're going to tell a Barovian campaign, but Strahd's not in it. We're never going to see Strahd, but we're going to tell this other story about being lost in the mists and being stuck in Barovia. Because I guess I kind of get it. Like, just because you come to Barovia doesn't mean you have to fight Strahd. I mean, it's a whole world in itself.
Yeah, it used to exist without Strahd in it.
Exactly. Ravenloft just was its own setting. It didn't have to be about Strahd. So we had 2 campaigns, and I was like, all right, this is fantastic. So I talked with both of their game masters about the characters they had and where a feasible overlap was, and we found this perfect time where a character that joined campaign 1 late, towards the end of the campaign, because there was a character death, had been established as existing in Barovia already, had joined the gang at the last minute, And we sort of looked at that timeline backwards and we said, okay, well, Athena is most likely going to be around when this other group is there.
Okay.
And then and then Craig said, "Oh, and there was this event in my campaign that split the party up. They were all being attacked by the hags at the windmill, and it was like, great. So in your campaign, the party got under attack and they split up, and we know that Athena from your campaign was around in Barovia at the same time, and it's like looking through the fog and realizing, oh my God, these two stories."
It's like you're doing detective work.
That's exactly right. And it's a really great way for me to stay connected with Quelmar because I am reaching out to all these game masters and I'm talking to them about their campaigns and we're building these stories kind of together. I'm consulting with them. And my only job is, like I said, matchmaker. I run the final game based on the research done to see where these two characters could meet. And in doing so, it's slowly but surely building a greater Quelmar web where we are seeing not every story is connected yet, but a lot of them do connect in very fun ways. And
That's
so
really
you can
cool.
see, yeah. So that's my job, but it's my primary job. My only job right now is I live on the wiki, I research, I look at all the stories, and then I tell stories that fit between the stories. I tell the stories that live between the lines.
Yes, I see that you made the most recent change a little bit before the interview started.
Yes, well, I was just looking at that because I had to remind myself. One of your questions was what's Quelmar's geography or what's Quelmar look like? And I was like, okay, what does Quelmar look like again? A very silly question but yeah.
Well, yeah, let's get started with the actual world now that we have the whole organization stuff kind of well situated. So, yeah,
For sure.
what does the world look like?
Yeah, so Quelmar, I just sort of doodled it one day in a computer science class, which is, frankly, I'm embarrassed. I'm ashamed because in the years that followed, I watched how other people did world building and they do amazing, simulations of the weather patterns and the erosion. And this is how this coast should look. And these rivers need to run down the mountain from this direction.
Yep.
And it's incredibly taxing and in detail-oriented work that I am like, that's amazing. And here we are with Quelmar. I was bored and waiting for a lecture to be over, and I drew 4 big blobs on a sheet of paper. Unfortunately, the paper doesn't exist, but pictures of the paper still exist.
Yep.
You can still find pictures of it online.
Got mine somewhere around here.
Yeah. I'm glad to have another fellow of the Doodle Club. Anybody,
Yeah.
Look, this is a message to everyone listening. If you want to create a world and you just want to draw cool shapes, you want to trace a coffee stain, you just want to make something that it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be geologically sound. It can be whatever cool shape you come up with, and it is the right shape for that world.
I started off with not drawing a bunch of huge blobs. I started off much smaller. So that there was room to expand where I kind of knew what I was doing at that point.
Like you said, some people start small. They'll just create a single coast or a single city or whatever, and they'll grow the world out from there. Quelmar, unfortunately, ashamedly, started big, started with the outlines of every land in the world, and then it was like a coloring book. We'll just fill it in from there.
Right.
And so there are 4 major lands of Quelmar. They were all named and drawn at the very, very top from day one. And I sort of see them like little mini worlds in and of themselves. Not a lot of Quelmar campaigns take place across the continents, just like, you don't see that in any other world really.
Yeah.
So the four big ones are, I'll do this sort of clockwise. So if we're at 1 o'clock, you're looking sort of top right. There is the land of Asugbo, which is the largest continent, and it is the one that I like to think is the most structured, sort of like Middle Earth. Mm-hmm. It is the one that has large rolling fields and vales, mountain ranges, wide rivers to traverse the whole span of the continent to travel from point A to B. It was the continent we set Towson Tabletop on, and as a result, it became a little patchwork because it was the first time we had a whole bunch of different people bringing things to the table.
Uh-huh.
But we found that what worked the best was if it was that sort of Middle Earth stand-in, because a lot of people come to D&D and fantasy role-playing just kind of thinking about Middle Earth. So
Yeah.
what it became in the years that followed was just, if you don't know where else to set your campaign, or you don't care where to set your campaign, we've got this great land that is analogous to Middle Earth as far as geography and landscape and terrain. Just drop it there, and then you don't have to think too hard. Just picture Lord of the Rings, and boom, you've got your Asugabo land.
Yep, exactly.
The next land, if we're sort of going, so we were like sort of 1 o'clock, so we'll go to like 3 o'clock now. There's a small continent. We've got a couple of lands that are very specialized and built for specific types of stories.
Uh-huh.
The land of Levincon is a land. It is a politically driven land of basically one king or one leader who rules the whole continent. It's a very small continent to be, it's not as big as the main four, but
right.
That became a catch-all for anyone who wants to tell stories about a land where there is one king who rules over everything. When it was invented, the king, didn't exist. It wasn't built to be this thing, but over time, especially with the work brought from a good friend named Dean Whitfield, it became a gnomish land. And the idea became that king was a gnome.
All right.
And so then the idea became, okay, does he have a gnomish kingdom? And so people started to put a lot of gnomes in Levincon, and then people started to create little gnomish dynasties and noble houses that live under the Levincon, which I think is just Latin for lightning king, Levincon. And so Levincon is the default. You need a land with dynasties and one big ruler. It works. It does the job. Below Levincon, we have Amusa, or some people call it Amusa. That's one thing that hasn't been worked out in Quelmar, is that because we have so many disparate factions and we don't have a pronunciation guide anywhere, you'll have people who come to, like we have Quelmar Con, where groups will come together from across the country.
Uh-huh.
During Quelmar Con, you'll have people show up and they're like, I'm from Amusa. And then other people are like, that's not how it's said. And then other people are like, it is where we're from.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that how, like, those names actually drift over time? Is because like a foreigner shows up and they say the name and then they transliterate into their language, and it's like, and then it's being pronounced incorrectly by other people. And
exactly. When I invented Amusa, it was pronounced Amusa. I think most of the people in the community now pronounce it Amusa. There is a passionate group that still follow what I think is the correct pronunciation.
I can understand, because like you're pronouncing it more like mucus, and they're trying to pronounce it more like muse. So theirs is more pretty.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what they're trying to do.
Amusa is, it's the land of, it's I don't really know what it's the land of, only because it is.
Oh no.
Okay, look, I told you I wasn't gonna have all the answers. It is the, it's the place where Quelmar's biggest and most active campaigns are happening right now. And because that is recent history, I'm not quite in the room or in the story or in the campaign to understand. I don't have a great sense of what it's the land of right now, but give it a year when those campaigns wrap up and all of the storytelling told and all of the world building done in Amusa will be nicely packaged and tied up and put on the wiki, and I'll be able to read it and be like, oh, I get it. It's the land of secrets. It's the land of...
an anthology for it.
And then I can run an anthology for it. Yeah.
Well, it looks like it's the one that has like a sort of Mediterranean section from the map I'm looking at, with like on the western edge. There's a bunch of
with
islands.
The big peninsula. Yeah. It does have. It's got some swamps. What else? It's got swamps. Oh, and it's got Gallic. So the reason why this is what Amusa was for many years before it became, before everybody's working on Amusa now. But Amusa was home to the Manhattan or the Waterdeep or the Sharn, the Coruscant. Pick your fantasy capital city of the world, and that is where Gallic is. Gallic is our Waterdeep. It is our Coruscant. It is our major. Like, it's a city that it takes like a week to walk across.
Oh, jeez.
So it is the most major metropolitan area. And for me, for most of Quelmar's history, it was like, yeah, Amusa's like that's where the big city is. But outside of the big city, nobody put a lot of thought into what was there. So it's great that the campaigns that are happening right now are all world building and building it out. They've devised this amazing canyon um, that is built into the land that divides Amusa in two. It's really cool. But I don't know much else about Amusa. But if you want to learn more about Amusa or you want to create things for Amusa, be my guest. Um,
All
that's
right.
what Quelmar does. Uh, and then so that was like 6 or like 5 o'clock. So if we jump to the lower left hand side of Quelmar, we have Terrace, Pteris, Terrace. Terrace is the desert land. The it is heavily Dark Sun inspired. It is heavily Mad Max inspired. It
Okay.
is um, people love to tell apocalyptic stories, and Terrace is a great place to do that because you can have large wasteland swaths of not necessarily post-apocalyptic, but like deserts where food is sparse and people are hostile and you are fighting for your life. Um, and so some people have adapted apocalyptic stories to Terrace. Other people have just adapted those apocalyptic stories to the end of Quelmar. Quelmar's history is written out beginning to end in very large strokes. So we know there is an apocalypse. We know there are people left after the apocalypse. Um,
Got your
and some
Ragnarok all
stories.
set up.
Yeah, Ragnarok's all set up. That's right. So Terrace is the Mad Max, the desert. What else can I say about Terrace? It is just there are some really great chapters of world building done there from a wonderful man named Jesse Marciniak who devised a kingdom of seafaring Mediterranean inspired. He looked at like the Punic Wars, like
Uh-huh.
Italy and Mediterranean, and he devised a fantasy, seafaring rowboat culture um,
Okay.
that lives on the coast, the east coast of Terrace.
Like an allegory to Carthage.
Uh, maybe. Uh, I don't. I could see that. I'd have to ask Jesse where it really comes from, what he was inspired by, but it's um probably some of my favorite world building was done there.
Okay.
And then in the top left, just north of the deserts, we have Eisenhound. Eisenhound, I like to compare to. Um, there's a Shakespeare play called A Midsummer Night's Dream.
hmm
I like to think a lot of people are familiar with it, but I also live in theater circles, so
It's one of the more well-known ones.
the briefest of it is that A Midsummer Night's Dream is about it is honestly the Feywild itself could be said to be inspired by Midsummer Night's Dream because there is a fairyland in this Shakespearean play that crosses over with the mortal land, and a lot of the joy of that story is where the fairies and the mortals sort of bicker and fight, and there's some overlap of how their stories intertwine. Eisenhound is sort of like what that is. It's where the Feywild most intersects with Quelmar, so there are so many, and it's also just like the forested continent. If you want your Forest Moon of Endor story, you want to tell a story with giant redwood trees and you're lost in thick forests, Eisenhound is the forested continent. um
Okay. So kind of like Germany somewhat, because Germany's got the Schwarzwald.
yeah, if you wanted to do a story set in there, I would absolutely tell you to go to Eisenhound just for the visuals of it. It will feel the same. Um, and so it's forest and it's magic and it's fey and it's fanciful.
Yeah.
Um,
I think Shakespeare also included, like, back to the Fae stuff. There's Fae stuff in a lot of his plays.
oh yeah, sure. The Tempest. There's
Yeah,
there's
Tempest a bunch.
there's
There's
at least a couple others.
yeah, Romeo and Juliet. The Mercutio's monologue is all about
Oh,
Queen Mab.
language wise, yes. The way they talk, absolutely. Actual like weird fey creatures, it's rarer, but yes, Tempest
I meant
and
more
Midsummer.
references and like allusions
Yeah,
to Fae stuff.
yeah. No, he. I mean, that's just Shakespeare for you. He alluded to everything. He took every aspect of humanity's invention and would find ways to make it relevant and connected to what these people were feeling. And you
Hmm.
just, ugh, the universality of it. Sorry. It's last but not least, um, we have in the dead smack center of our realm, as you can imagine, is like the evil land, the forbidden land. Every good world needs a forbidden land.
Hmm.
And for us, that's Kiston. It is the place where, all the dragons live and go and breathe and visit.
And in your like clock analogy, this is like the center where the hands are
This
attached
is
to the
the
clock.
center. Yeah, this is the dial in the center where the hands are attached. This is where if you go to Kiston, you'll get eaten by a dragon, but then if you survive, you'll watch the dragon get eaten by a larger monster.
Okay,
Um,
just like in How to Train a Dragon.
yeah, exactly. I mean, all the mountains are lethally steep, impossible to climb. Everything there has adapted to just fly because traversing it is impossible.
You took the
Um,
"Here There Be Dragons" part of your map quite seriously.
yeah, basically it was. And I say me, but actually this is Zach Miller, another good friend who invented this dragon land back in the day, and we decided it would be. Yeah, I mean, I want to. I'll make this a little clearer. But when I drew the map, I drew the shapes, I gave them names. I had no idea what was inside. So a lot of the work in Eisenhound was done by a fine young man named Matt Demetrides. Kiston's Zach Miller, Jesse Marciniak, and Terrace I established. Gallic was done by a guy named Brad Bowers. A Sugbo is that Towson tabletop crew. So all of these lands that I'm talking about, I'll take like 25% credit for
Hmm.
helping them establish it internally, especially in those early days. But it's almost entirely just based on the ideas they brought to the table. And Quelmar continues in that fashion.
Right. You mentioned that like island nation. Is that Levincon or something else?
We do have a archipelago, which is like the Caribbean, a whole bunch of little islands.
Uh-huh.
Um, that we do have something like that. It's called the Gulf of Thorpe Isles, which was built. It was useless and it sat unused for many, many years. And then a great game master named Kelly Hutchison from Maryland, rejoined Quelmar all the way back from the. So she played in Towson Tabletop,
Uh-huh.
and then she left and she had her life for a while, and then she came back like 7 years later and to run a campaign. She wanted to run a story. She wanted to try DMing, and she was like, "I'm going to do it in Quelmar." Um, and so she took that little section, and she was like, "Well, this is a Caribbean. This is pirate territory." So she
Ooh.
built all these little towns and nations and societies on the islands. Um, and so the Gulf of Thorpe Isles, as of only like 2 or 3 years ago, is like prime pirates. We've now had two pirates campaigns at this point. Um,
Excellent.
yeah. Look, a good pirates campaign is impossible to beat. You got the morally gray players and the raiding and the looting, but then you still feel heroic when you save the. It's great.
Yeah. When I did a pirate campaign, our party quickly went into the pretty bad territory.
It's impossible to avoid.
We were fighting undead, right? But we were also like enslaving people. So it felt like we're
Look, the second you decide to just walk the line of good and be good guys, you're not pirates anymore.
I
You're just sailors.
reminded of that line from the Pirates of the Caribbean. Does one good deed undo a lifetime of wickedness? That campaign petered out, though. We never got to have that moral conversation at the end of it.
Mm. It's on hiatus.
It's been on hiatus for about 10 years now or something, but yeah.
I've seen longer. It'll come back. Trust in the. You know what? Even if it's not the same people, even if you're not in it, who knows? I'm sure some people one day will pick up that story.
Oh yeah, maybe I'll hand it off to one of the Quelmar groups and they can finish it up.
I mean, they are hungry. So those are the main lands, and the speaking to Quelmar's purpose and goals and what it does compared to some other worlds is, each of these worlds was filled in to fulfill a purpose.
Mm.
Everything was done very specifically to be a place that someone needed for something. Um, and as a result, they have become archetypes of sorts, right? You've got your desert, you've got your Tatooine land and your Endor land. You've got your Middle Earth land, you've got your big Manhattan City. Quelmar is so full of these tropes um, because it's really built to be a sandbox for any story you do want to tell.
Hmm.
With the whole idea of breaking barriers and creating accessibility for anybody who wants to tell a story, um, it was important, as the mission went on, to just be like, we want to make sure there's a place that whatever story you're trying to tell, it's welcome here. We'll make it work.
Right.
Um, and so the lands of Quelmar are more defined by the archetypes, the tropes that they embody than they are by specific things. But there are some fun specific stuff thrown in there.
I did have an interesting question about like the collaborative aspect of it. Is what have you ever had to deal with any like bad actors within that space?
My I don't want to speak it into the universe, but I think my biggest fear for all 10 years has been the existence of somebody, a brilliant writer who has no intention to roleplay. Somebody who wants to come into Quelmar and invent and fill out all of these details with zero intention of like sharing them or bringing them to a table or making them part of the community world building mission.
Hmm.
Um, for that reason, a lot of Quelmar game masters, myself included, will typically consider nothing canon until it's appeared at a table. So the wiki, for the most part, minus character backstories, because most people who come and play in Quelmar will love to throw their backstories on the wiki, and then
Uh-huh.
we'll take people and towns and stuff from the backstories and build it into the world. But the definition of a bad actor to me would be one of two things. It'd be somebody who comes in and steals the opportunity to world build from other people.
Because it's sort of an improv experience for how it's created, not so much like a writing experience from the way you've described it.
That's exactly right. It's yes and, right? Most people are familiar in improv. The idea is when somebody offers you something in improv, you say yes and, or you say no but. And Quelmar follows the same thing. So if somebody says, I want to tell a zombie apocalypse story like The Walking Dead, we can't quite say yes and, because we don't have, a modern where's like Walking Dead take place again? Georgia or something?
I have not actually seen the show.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen it. But like we don't have the United States of America in Quelmar. If you want to tell the Walking Dead story, we can't say yes, the United States exists here, but we can say no, but we have very similar places that you can adapt it to, and we have all sorts of offers. Game masters will often be like, oh, this is a great place and time to tell that story, or this is a great place and time to tell that story. Or if you change them from zombies to ghosts, or zombies to vampires, or zombies to mind flayers, then you can put that story in this place. And offers come from all over the place on how those stories can be adapted or told. And so to me, the person who comes in and says no, and just no, right? Somebody who comes in and says, there's been a magic spell. Oh God, I don't want to speak anything like this into the world, because nobody's going to steal it. Quelmar is a great place, and we have measures in place to keep this sort of thing from happening. But if somebody's like, I'm going to tell a story establishing that hobbits could never step foot in Terrace because of an ancient hobbit spell from the god of hobbits, and now in forever in Quelmar, if you're a hobbit, you can never visit Terrace because of this curse.
Uh-huh.
Like that's the sort of prohibitive world building that I don't think anybody really wants to do, because it's just a jerk move, and it's not very fun. But it can be, but with Quelmar, because it takes place over time and not just space, this is when we go, yes, and the curse existed for a year. And so then we throw it on the timeline, and it's like, yes, no hobbits were allowed in Terrace for a year.
Well, I actually had something like that in my campaign. Well, one of the campaign worlds that I built, where it was a bridge that goblins couldn't cross.
Hmm.
Um, but what they could do is they could just go around it. So you could have like hobbits can't land on the eastern shore of Terrace,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
there must be like some bay that has like a little peninsula that juts out north to south. So you can't land on the eastern side by the ocean, but you can go in and land on the western side, and you get around.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. That's how we navigate bad actors. Is if somebody comes at Quelmar with an idea that feels prohibitive, we find the ways to still make the idea work because we want you to tell the story you want to tell.
Hmm.
We just want to make sure everybody can tell the stories they want to tell.
Gotcha.
And so that's the first definition of a bad actor. The second definition of a bad actor is just like a bad person, um, outside of tabletop stuff, people who are just not great people, for any number of reasons. And having grown so large and experienced so many people, there have been some people that, just like any tabletop, you just sort of talk to
Right.
them. And if that doesn't work, you have to ask them politely, to leave. You have to, or I think any group or organization that goes on long enough for enough years and with enough people will encounter the worst of the worst. And Quelmar has had and has dealt with the worst of the worst.
Well, I meant specifically more on the creative side, like the
Yeah,
personality wise side. That feels like there's a more obvious answer there. Yes, we don't play
yeah,
with people like that.
yeah. We don't. Yeah, we've made sure that the Quelmar has become the safe and creative space for everybody to come and work and play.
Right.
But in the world building space, uh, like I said, I think the fact that it's not necessarily canon unless it shows up at a table, which is not a hard rule. It's not written anywhere. It's just one that a lot of game masters will live by, even
Hmm.
outside of Quelmar.
Yeah.
Um, that tends to keep it safe. That tends to keep people from wanting to come in and just write up these things or delete these things. Having a wiki as opposed to that Obsidian website or the other document campaign keepers, having a full-fledged wiki like this means that we have complete control over the backups, histories. It's basically impossible to unwrite or delete something that's gone up on Quelmar. So even if we had a bad actor who came in and was like, I don't like this history of the elves. I think the elves are all going to be from the fourth level of hell. Um, if they erase the page and try to put that in, then we'll just, it's a wiki. You pull up the history, you undo the changes, and then you
Yep.
talk to them and you're like, how about we invent some elves that are from the fourth level of hell? It's not all the elves, but there are a bunch of them. And they mean business.
Yep.
And so that's part of, I mean, I find that's a lot of what I've done over the years is just, so get this, ask me how many Quelmar campaigns I've played in.
Uh, yeah. How many have you played? I know you've DM'd at least like a dozen. It looks like.
One. I've played in one Quelmar campaign.
Wow. Okay.
I have one player character in this world, and so a lot of what I find I do is helping other people tell their stories, um, being that person in the game master's channel that is helping do the yes ands and the no buts, making suggestions and finding, uh, you know, uh, and this is why it became a charity, and this is why the goal became larger than me, and
Mm.
it's just I got a lot of passion for helping people tell their stories, and when I found other people with a passion for helping other people tell their stories, it just sort of snowballed, and it went from this. And I think that's what being a game master is. I think a huge part of being a game master is wanting to help other people tell their stories, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that was the biggest part of game mastering to me, and that's the biggest part of Quelmar as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. The collaborative storytelling.
Yeah,
Well, let's get back to the more like meaty parts of the world.
sure.
You gave us a pretty broad overview of like the places and the like sort of iconic character that they have. What are the gods like for Quelmar?
Sure. Quelmar has a lot of gods as a result of players ingesting other media and going, oh, I want to follow Bane because I loved Baldur's Gate 3, or I want to follow Apollo because I love Roman literature.
Mhm.
Um, and so Quelmar, as a result, has a lot of worlds have very specific pantheons. Quelmar's pantheons have been built over 10 years of the gods that people have brought to the realm.
Mhm.
So as a result, there's a lot of really familiar gods. You know, we've got Pelor, we've got Garl Glittergold, we've got Vecna, we've got Tiamat, we've got um, Odin. I'm looking at the list now. Odin, Lathander Helm, um, the elemental powers like Istishia and Kosuth, and but more importantly, and to me, what I would define as Quelmar's gods, these are the gods that we put in the book we published,
Mhm.
um, are the gods that either the players world built and invented themselves, because they had very specific ideas of what bonds and ideals their character had, and they wanted to invent a god specifically about that. Or alternatively, as in many campaigns, sometimes players want to be gods, and in Quelmar, very rarely a player does reach that point, and they ascend. And when that happens, they get thrown into the gods list like anyone else, and then you find players years later are like, "I'll follow this god because I found him on the wiki," not realizing, "Oh yeah, that's Linus Owens, except he died and became a god 5 years ago." And then you meet Linus at a convention years later, and you're like, "Hey, by the way, you know your god? This is him." Um,
That's
um,
good.
so to me, I'll say there's two gods I'll bring up, who are the player ascendant gods, and then I can tell you more about one other god that is a player created god. But Cragnux the Fang Fisted is, or sorry, Cragnux the Dragon Slayer is, I think, his ascended name. That is Linus's god. Cragnux became a major uh, power across a whole bunch of different Quelmar campaigns. He seems to keep popping up in places where I don't expect him to pop up. Cragnux's story is that this is House and Tabletop, so the second campaign we ever ran.
Uh-huh.
He's a dragonborn, very generically. A dragon burned down his monastery, and he was already an orphan, and it killed his, monastery adopted monk parents, and he vowed vengeance on dragons. We spend sessions in House and Tabletop fighting dragons. He gets to one-on-one with a dragon. He loses. We're level 4. So he dies in that battle. He does not beat the dragon. But everybody watching him, and Linus is a fantastic actor, incredible improvisational actor, hilarious dude, and he is a lovable guy, which meant all of the other players in the department and at our table loved to support Linus and watch him play and help him play. And when he died, it was heartbreaking for the table in a very similar way to, like, when someone dies on Critical Role, you see all the fans cry. Linus was our version of that. And so Cragnux, the players worshipped him. They did things in his name now. And eventually, when given the opportunity to revive Linus with a wish, this is a year or so later,
Mm-hmm.
His IRL friend Eric decided to use the wish to not revive Cragnux, but ascend him so that he would be the power, the god, the thriving force that everybody was using his name in. They were now using it in the name of a real god. And so he just became this little demigod. It wasn't like he was now ruler of the universe, but it was like, all right, we'll give him like the smallest divine status so that he can actually be a god. And so he was Cragnux the Dragon Slayer, and that inspired a chapter of Quelmar's history that's now told over several campaigns. That is just about this new chapter of paladins and dragon slayers of the realm who are dedicated to Cragnux. I mean, there is the Church of Cragnux and the Friends of Cragnux and the Heritage of Cragnux, all of these sections and factions and chapters all dedicated to dragon slaying, and they became a huge reason why the realm was ready when dragons return.
Got your
Because
own St. George all set to go.
exactly. So we've got our Saint George, um, who inspired many, and I use Linus as the example because the story I told is a real story of at a convention with another player who I knew Cragnux. I got to introduce Cragnux to people who joined Quelmar many years later, maybe not even ever realizing Cragnux was a real person.
Yeah, that is a really cool experience.
And so I love that. Cragnux will always be maybe my favorite god of Quelmar. But the other god I'll mention is there is a god. There's not a ton about it on the wiki. It's got a page, but we have a convenience store god.
Oh boy.
So I think this might have been inspired. I didn't make this one, but I think this was inspired by um, the rabid fan base of some convenience stores. Like if you're familiar with Buc-ee's, which is big in the South, big in Texas, um, there are chains of convenience stores that people are they've got the merchandise and the hats and they love them so much. On the East Coast where I'm from, we have an amazing convenience store in Maryland called Royal Farms. It's exceptional. Get their fried chicken. You'll never have anything like it. So I get where they're coming from, but the god of Stuckies is a true and tried divine power that rose out of the realm's collective joy and love of convenience stores or taverns. Stuckies is like it's like the god of taverns, but if that god was physically a tavern.
Okay.
It's really funny to see how like the Stuckies it's become almost like a in community running joke because if you need a place to go and you didn't prepare a spot to stop in, it's like, oh, there's a Stuckies here. Of course there's a Stuckies here. There's Stuckies everywhere. So it's almost like Stuckies franchised itself out so hard that it became a god of the world and people worshipped it and prayed by it. And
Your two favorite gods are St. George and Jack in the Box, basically.
that's yeah. My two favorite gods are St. George and Jack in the Box. Nothing like praying to old 7-Eleven.
But there's no anthropomorphized version of Stuckies. You pray to it, and it's like if it
That's
physically
correct.
shows up, it is a restaurant.
From what I understand, Stuckies is just the convenience store. It is not like the mascot of Stuckies. It is not like a humanoid, character of Stuckies. It is just the convenient. It is just Stuckies the tavern, Stuckies the convenience store, Stuckies the gas station, Stuckies the. It shows up in different forms through history, right? Like a story set in sort of early fantasy, it's like Stuckies the tavern,
Hmm.
but like go into more modern era, it's like Stuckies the gas station.
Right, of
Um,
course.
so Stuckies is a very fascinating god. But we have a number of gods that players invented very specifically from scratch for their characters to follow that have become part of the Quelmar canon, the Quelmar lore. Um, I'll just highlight. I'll do Dezian. Only because Dezian is just such a lovely. I a wonderful player named Lindsay Haggerty invented Dezian for a campaign 2 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, and when Dezian manifests, it is an elephant, but the elephant's ears, like they look like butterfly wings.
Okay.
Um, which that image, like these two massive giant, like they're still elephant ear shaped, but they're like designed like butterfly wings, I think.
Hmm.
Anyway, I love the idea of Dezian visually, but I also love Dezian because, and I might have to just sort of read a little from the wiki here, but Dezian is the god of life and curiosity.
All
It
right.
is a god that is. Let me see how to best put this. I'm going to just steal from the page here so that I can put it in the words of Lindsay. It is a god that encourages you to wander the multiverse and embrace the strangeness that you find, to be ever curious about its inhabitants, and to take the time to see and to watch and to learn, to collect the bits and pieces of knowledge that sparkle and share them back to me. And remember, as you wander, to protect the peoples of the lands and of the Feywilds from which you come from, and to defend these people fiercely and act as champions for those who cannot defend themselves. And to me, Dezian reflects a lot about how I feel about Quelmar and the people who come to Quelmar.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I am asking people who come and join us, and anybody who wants to tell a story here with us, to take the time to see and to watch and to learn, to collect the bits and pieces of knowledge that sparkle and to share them back, and to defend if you not in world defend the characters, but like out of world defend your community, help each other out, get each other's backs, embrace the humans around you, and to show compassion and mercy. And the fact that all of that is tied to the word curiosity is just so beautiful to me, because I never looked at Quelmar. I've never gotten, unfortunately, the opportunity to look at Quelmar from the outside, having been there from the beginning.
Right.
And to come into Quelmar blind, I can only imagine what a curious place it is, because there is so much. I mean, the wiki, I think, has 1,616 pages.
Wow.
Written about Quelmar on the wiki, which is a lot. And so there's a lot to explore and discover and be curious about. And so I think maybe Dezian reflects for me the joy and the curiosity and the fun of coming into this world and learning and seeing it and being curious about it and becoming, more and more knowledgeable about it, and then using that knowledge to tell more stories. I say this in person when I run games at game stores and I'm trying to teach people what Quelmar does, but all of this is effectively the old idiom of standing on the shoulders of giants. When you tell a campaign right now in Quelmar, you are building that on top of the world building that's been happening from people last year, the year before that, and that's being told on top of the world building of the people the year before that, the year before that.
Yeah.
The difference and we go into this in the opening of our book, is that when you buy a campaign setting book for Eberron or for Planescape or whatever, you are telling your version of that world. The river you invent and you send your players down in the Forgotten Realms does not actually exist in the Forgotten Realms. You can't take that to Ed Greenwood and be like, yeah, this river exists, right? I mean, he's a cool guy. He might be like, yeah, that's canon now.
Yeah,
but
he's actually pretty accessible for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Eberron's a better example where that's something that wouldn't happen.
That's true. Take it to Ken Baker, and it's not gatekeeping. It's just that this is the world very specifically as created by very specific people, and you playing this story at home with your friends, that's a copy of the world. That's a version of the world, a variant of the world. With Quelmar, we invite and embrace everyone to tell their stories in real time, actually in the world. When you want to tell a story in Quelmar and you make that river or you build that city, join the Discord channel, or just, tell whoever you got the Quelmar book from and be like, we did this. And then boom, it'll go on the wiki, it'll go on some info base. And it's real. Like, you are in the real version of Quelmar. When you pick up the book and you start telling a Quelmar story, you are in real Quelmar, the actual Quelmar, not a copy of it for you and your friends. It is the real thing. And so Dezian reflects that to me. Coming in curious, learning about it, and then defending and embracing it, becoming a part of it. So I really like that. Props to Lindsay. Something always drew me to Dezian, and I don't know if I ever put it in words like that before, but I think that's always been what it is.
Yeah, that is a really nice, beautiful connection to make. So one of the things I had a question about for the world, with so many like different creators and gods and different pieces of the world coming into it from all those different creators, is
Sure.
Uh, I mean, in a broader sense, how do you avoid like a sort of kitchen sink feeling to it?
The way that it's worked so far to avoid the kitchen sink feeling um, is honestly the timeline. Not every world does this. A lot of worlds will do it, but by dissecting Quelmar into very specific eras that range from the beginning of existence to the end of history. We call
Hmm.
it post history because, the realm might be over, but people have survived. And, this is where like the spelljammer essence comes into play is like, you've escaped and you go out into the stars. Quelmar's dead, but life goes on. Um,
Right.
I think the trick and my advice to anybody who's afraid of the kitchen sink feeling is that if you have distinct times and eras and you set the expectations and boundaries of what this era is about, um, then you give people smaller sandboxes that are more specific to what they want to do. And more often than not, those goals from those different stories will line up much better. Um, we have an age of sort of exploration where Quelmar is still being explored, and a lot of people love these stories of the unknown worlds or more closed off societies that don't know about the other people. It's like the early stages of civilization when you're still wandering around the video game Civilization, where you're wandering around and you're
Right.
discovering the other people. Um, if you've set the expectations that this era is about that, then the people who want to tell stories that are like that will find themselves there. And the people who want to tell stories about robots uh, will not be telling stories there.
Right.
Um, and instead, they'll find their way to one of the later eras where robots are more of a thing.
That touches on another question I had, was just about like the wiki indicated that you did have sort of a modern setting that this was a part of, and not just a fantasy setting. So
That's
that's
correct.
just because you have a long enough history that's sort of vaguely described enough that you do get into
Yeah.
more of a like steampunk, arcane punk era for
So
the world.
this is kind of a fun fact. 3 years into Quelmar, somebody wanted to run Shadowrun,
Hmm.
and I was like, "You should do it in Quelmar," and they were like, "That's dumb. That's for D&D." And I said, "No, no, 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 no. We'll make it work." Um, and so that was the beginning of the idea that what if Quelmar, evolves and becomes the Shadowrun setting, something that Shadowrun can be set in. Um, and so we broke an era up and we said, okay, from this point on, things in this era you can expect to be more modern, more whether that's modern like Earth or whether that's modern like Cyberpunk or Shadowrun. Um, and the further you get into that era, the more cyberpunky or Shadowrunny it becomes. And so to this is a really great tool of accessibility. We invented this fictional event that is sort of like a mini apocalypse,
Okay.
just like Spell Plague, and they always create
Oh
their
yeah,
sort
yeah.
of mini world era breakers, changers. We invented one for Quelmar that breaks it up, and everything after that Spell Plague like event, it had to be Spell Plague like because in a modern world, in a modern setting, magic's not magic, right? When you play Cyberpunk, you're not casting fireballs. So why aren't people casting fireballs still? Because magic's weird and broken. Doesn't exist like it used to.
Okay.
And so part of that was we made a whole bunch of changes where uh like the seasons, and traditionally in Quelmar our seasons were 4 years long, 4 years of winter, 4 years of summer, 4 years of spring. That was a tool that was done because that lets people tell their perpetual winter stories,
Okay.
their Game of Thrones inspired sort of things. And then it was like, okay, well, after this spell plaguey event, seasons are only 3 months long. And the sky changed colors because magic started to break, and now the sky is blue instead of a reddish orange color. Which is, I still get people to this day who go, wait, the sky in Quelmar is red? And uh, I have to be like, it's really, look, it is really, really hard to get people to know the color of the sky because if you don't shove it down their throats, nobody's ever going to talk about it, and everybody is going to overlook it. And it's a fun little quirk of Quelmar is that the sky is red, but it feels like everybody has a moment in their Quelmar career where they go, "Oh, oh, the sky's red." And so in that spell plague, the sky turns blue. So the idea is if you want to just tell a story on Earth, okay, sure. We've got an era of Quelmar where the sky is normal and the seasons are normal and magic's not really a thing. And, electricity and technology is coming about. It is the cyber renaissance of Quelmar, which is literally what we called the era, the cyber renaissance, CR. Um, so Masks, which is a superhero RPG, anybody who plays Masks in Quelmar, it takes place in that era.
Right.
Some of the Call of Cthulhu campaigns that have happened, not all of them, but some of them have been in the CR era, especially if they're trying to be more like 50s or 60s as opposed to like 20s and 30s. We've got Monster Hearts, all of those games. I think we've only had one Monster Hearts campaign, but that Monster Hearts campaign was in this era so that everybody could just be modern teenagers in a modern school. Paranoia, which is another sort of sci-fi RPG, that obviously takes place in this era. The Cyberpunks and the Shadowruns. So part of the accessibility was not just we want everybody to run their D&D games in Quelmar, but if you want to learn to play Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast, breakout game of the last couple years, amazing, super fun, improvisational, unique mechanics. Can't plug it enough. Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast. But like if you want to learn an RPG that's not D&D, or you just want to have people to play it with, but you still want to sort of stay in familiar territory, or you like the world building puzzle of Quelmar, it's built for every RPG. We have an appendix in the book that lists 20 something RPGs and says, if this is what you want to play, do it this way. If this is what you want to play, here's how you should do it. Never telling people how to do it, but rather suggesting. So, the book will say, if you want to play Masks, we recommend you set it in this era. And so that's how we handle some of that kitchen sink stuff, is that if you want to be in a sci-fi campaign and you've got a robot butler, we've very specifically broken up an era of time. You'll still be in Amusa or Amusa. You'll still be in that big city of Gallic, but it's become New Gallic because at some point in time it was attacked and burned down and rebuilt. New York style, if you like Futurama. Mm-hmm. So in New Gallic, you're still in Quelmar, you're still in familiar territory, you can still connect it. The big thing that players love to do is connect their characters with older characters they've played, or with friends' characters, or with previous stories. And so by telling that Supers campaign, that Masks campaign in Quelmar still, you can have a character who is based off of an ancient dark power in the world. But that dark power was actually just a lich that lived in the previous era, in the fantasy era.
Gotcha.
And so that lets you avoid the kitchen sink a little bit. The timeline's I don't think enough people do it, but if you break up your world into timelines and you're not afraid to jump and tell stories in the far past and the far future and whenever, then you don't have to be worried about everybody trying to cram everything living together in a relatively short time period.
Well, I think another reason people might be against that is because part of having a broader campaign world experience than just like a single campaign is like having pieces of your previous campaign show up in the right. New one that you're playing. And if you have these wildly distant, either in space or time, different campaigns that you're playing within the same world, it doesn't feel as connected when you do that.
That's exactly right. And different strokes for different folks, because there's a period of time, which I think is only like 100 years or so, where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 campaigns took place. Because some game masters, exactly what you're saying, they love to build a story that sort of follows up pretty quickly on another story or a past story. And so because of that completely logical desire, we'll have periods of time in Quelmar where a whole bunch of campaigns take place in. Very purposefully, they want it to build it like that so they can bring back NPCs from another campaign, or they've got a friend running a campaign in that era and they're looking forward to a crossover episode. But yeah, so I've done it. I get it. I want to tell stories with crossovers and with NPCs returning. but so do other people. So we make sure that people have the room to do that. If they want to do it, if it's something they want to do, like I love to do it before, then they can do it. If they want to just tell a story of distance and time and space and, you know, in a bubble of their own storytelling, absolutely. We give them that space too. We've got somebody who ran an Aliens RPG campaign, complete with xenomorphs, everything they wanted to throw into that campaign. And they did it in the post-history era, in the far future, in space. It was about a bunch of people coming to the remnants of Quelmar, like it was a destroyed, abandoned planet, and finding that some xenomorph colony had also landed there. Yeah, I mean, I get it. I think it's really hard to describe, but Quelmar has done everything probably humanly possible to give every game master the right tools to tell the story they want to tell.
Yeah.
And that sounds like the kitchen sink problem, but like I said, it takes a strong community and it takes a desire to defend and empathize with your fellow storytellers and want to work together on this sort of greater world building project.
Yeah. And you don't need to use all of those pieces within the story that you're telling. You just take the ones that work for
That's
you.
exactly right. That's exactly right.
Well, another thing I wanted to talk about is you mentioned there's a book that for the setting that is sort of an introduction to the idea of having a connected world like this.
We just published the curated Chronicles of Quelmar last year to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Quelmar. We took a set of, I think maybe there's 15 of Quelmar's most prominent game masters, all came together in a sort of quorum and went through every note and page and wiki article and Facebook post and everything, just absolutely distilled Quelmar down to what do we want to pass on almost like generationally. Like if somebody's going to pick up this book and get into Quelmar today, what do we want them to know about Quelmar to get them started on their mission in one easy book? It's only 200 pages maybe, which for a source book is pretty small. It's like Tasha's Cauldron sized. I'm sure some people think about books and by just picturing D&D books. So if you picture Tasha's Cauldron, just make it all about Quelmar. That's about the size of the book. Part of that was just going through the gods, finding the gods we want to showcase. That includes Dezian, that includes Stuckies, that includes Kragnux. The cities and the sections of the world. There's obviously so many distinct places and towns and things that people have invented that we can't showcase everything.
Right.
So it was really a matter of where has the most rich world building been done so that people can find interesting places to build off of. So it's a showcase. We took every continent and we give a very, generalized rundown of that continent. We do a double page spread. So, there's 2 pages for Amusa, 2 pages for Terrace.
Right.
And then in each continent, we just take one interesting city, one interesting location, something that we thought was unique or special or interesting to Quelmar. We didn't. So, I talked about Gallic being the big city, the Waterdeep, the Sharn.
Right. I was making that connection. Like Forgotten Realms does the same thing with the Sword Coast being basically the entire campaign setting at this point.
Yeah. Like we took Gallic. It's not even really in the book because there's nothing interesting or unique about Gallic as far as a storytelling setting. It's just the big city. So, I mean, we mentioned that there's a big city and it's Gallic, and if it's a metropolis, but then we do a zoom in on a different city somebody had invented, which was set into a canyon side, and everybody lives in holes in the walls, and they've got police and lovers, and it's a more unique location, and it's a more unique piece of storytelling. A lot of that was done by a lovely lady named Rachel Huxford, and that's what the book was for us, putting together, spending that year curating it, was let's find the best parts of Quelmar that we think are unique to Quelmar, and we'll showcase interesting enough places that you'll read the book and be like, "Ooh, this sounds cool and fun. I want to tell a story here." And we do the typical thing where we give like quest hooks and suggested adventure ideas and stuff, so that if you wanted to pick up the book and just tell a story in Zender City, that cave city, you can hit the ground running.
Cool. Yeah, I guess one of the other usual questions I ask is about races for the world. It feels like you sort of have like I can tell your stance is kind of like whatever people want to include, we'll make a section where that works for them. So if someone
Right,
wants to
right.
have like Dragonborn, Genasi, and Bladelings as the main races for a campaign, then you'll come up with a
Exactly.
place and time where that works.
I'll use the book for this reference because the races on the wiki are just there's 1,000 of them. If there's one thing that players love to bring to the table, whether it's like homebrewed or just special, or they want to feel like they are the unique creature, it's going to be a race. Everybody's got their special race they want to be.
Uh,
So you multiply that by 500 or so people, and you wind up with a realm with too many races. Uh, Luckily, it's a big realm, lots of different places. But in the book, we showcase a number of races that people have brought to Quelmar, but changed or updated, or some of them are like purely invented, and some of them are uh, unique takes on more classic races. So, for instance, there is the Proto Forged is an interesting example because Quelmar it sort of spawned from the fact that yes, Quelmar has one big continuous timeline. At some point in that timeline, Warforged have to exist.
okay.
But then, how does that? There's a number of stories that have been told about like the ongoing creation and emergence of the forged people and the actual war in which they sort of gain their independence. It's in Quelmar. Oh, so here's something I do know that's unique to Quelmar more so than others. In a lot of worlds like Eberron, the Warforged are built for war. They are forged for war. Um, in Quelmar, it's sort of backwards in that they were forged and then they had to fight to gain that independence and recognition from the realm
Okay.
because, a lot of people are like, these are robots, these are constructs, these are golems, these aren't people. I think in Everon, it's that they are built to fight and then they have to fight for themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they have to form their own nation to sort of protect kind of like a sort of I feel like Israel's kind of a hot button issue right now to draw that
But you're not wrong. You're
comparison.
not wrong. It is sort of a race state for the Warforged. I okay. So Quelmar's got they're not black sheep because we love all of Quelmar's editions equally. But I will say there is a colony of Warforged in Quelmar that somebody threw in, a guy named Seth many years ago, and they're called Skynet. And it is what it is. You take the good with the bad. If somebody wants to build a Warforged colony and call it Skynet, yes, and Skynet exists.
That's a fine story. That works. That's not a problem.
Yeah, yeah. So, which is great. So when the Terminator RPG comes out and somebody wants to run it in Quelmar, well, guess what? Skynet already exists. You're
Uh-huh.
welcome.
Yeah.
We've did it.
Yeah, you're all set.
Yeah. So, in sort of uh, in working on what the emergence of Warforged would look like in Quelmar in a world where time is, we kind of have to sort of know some of these steps and how this happens. Um, a guy named RJ worked diligently on establishing this timeline of the proto forged, the fact that there was the first war forged was effectively an accident, um, where there was a guy named Judge Dalton who found himself at the epicenter of a collapsing alchemy lab, and instead of dying, his body became pierced with these alchemical objects and ingredients. And as a result, he became a sort of half warforged. Um,
Okay.
and so the idea then, I think, was spawned was that to get to the full Warforged, we had to sort of discover Warforged, but not all at once. You can't just invent a race of people. And so it was like there is this accident, and then there is the experimentation to recreate the accident and figure out what worked and what didn't. And
Okay.
so there is a race in the book called the Proto-Forged that are um, there. It's like if you took chaos magic and you injected it into the Warforged mode. Like they're not perfect. Um, they sort of misfire and go berserk, and they've got this great little table where they might buffer or they might overclock or they might reboot because they're not quite built. They're still the prototype Warforged, and that's a fun group of people.
Half golems.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. They are the not quite living, not quite construct. A weird combination of both. Um, it's a really morbid story, actually. Somebody should talk to RJ about that because the idea that like the Warforged before they were 100% construct, they had to be like 90% construct, and before that, like 50% construct, and before that, like 25% construct.
Well, I mean, it's kind
Um,
of leaning into like the cyborg aspect of it. Like, and
yeah,
Terminators are kind of constructed the same way, where they're, I think some of the original ones within the Terminator story were like they'd kidnap someone and then like peel their skin off and then put it onto a robot because they didn't have a good way to like fully reconstruct faces.
I don't think I knew that, but that's equally morbid and
The
terrifying.
comics
So
get into a weird place.
they always do. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter to the series. The comics are always going to go in a weird place.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so that's one example of one of the fun races people have brought. So a lot of the races of Quelmar, it's less about we want to invent unique Quelmar things and more like we want to give a spin on it's that yes and that no but. So if somebody wants to
Hmm.
be an avatar alien in a campaign and the answer was, well, maybe we just don't just throw a. Everybody else is staying pretty source accurate for this very generic fantasy D&D campaign. So what if you are a Gith, but a type of Gith? Because the Gith are alien, they are, effectively
Uh-huh.
what it would be if you want to bring an avatar in. So we wound up with
They even
the.
have tails if they're doing astral projection.
That's right. So yeah, yeah, I guess. Uh, So so we wound up with there's a race in here called the Relith, which are a type of Gith from a different subsection of experimentation. Um, I mean, if I read this without out of context, it is Relith vary from 6 to 8 feet in height, with wispy hair. Their skin is colored in shades of blue. Their long limbs decorated with giraffe-like reticulated patterns, giving them the appearance of gracefully flowing when they move. Uh, I mean, it's basically describing Avatar people, but adapted to be something a little more agnostic, a little more fantasy friendly, a little more. And that's just again an example of we want everybody to have their cake and eat it too in Quelmar. You wanted to be an Avatar race in this very strictly fantasy setting. No, but we'll give you basically the Avatar race in this form of a type of Gith. Yeah, so I think every race in this book, there's a variant Dryad, there's variant humans, there's the variant Gith, there's a variant Dragonborn, which is a Wyvernborn. Which
Hmm. Okay.
I will say that the Wyvernborn needs to show up in more places. My one Quelmar character in the one campaign is a Wyvernborn. And so he's special to me because that's the race I invented to be special and I brought to the table to be unique. But I'm like, why is if we got Dragonborn, where are the Wyvernborns? There's so little Wyvernborns in any media. Um,
That's fine. I had something that was kind of like that in my campaign. It's not quite the same thing where it's like a sort of dragonborn, but a wyvern. Instead, it was this guy was like a powerful wizard, and it was because his mother had been stung by a wyvern while she was pregnant with him, and the poison sort of like changed him and made him like stronger and more magical.
I mean, that sounds like Wyvernborn to me.
Right,
Born
right.
of Wyvern essence.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's what made me think of that as, but it
Yeah.
not like scaly. Still, he was like all
Yeah.
human
It's
looking. But
just because it's like wyverns, they're so specific. They're like they're poisonous, and they've got the tails and the wings, and it's like you can build a very specific creature out of that that's not a dragonborn. The stinger, especially, right? Dragons don't have stingers.
yeah, so you do that instead of the dragon breath for their like racial
Exact.
ability.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a simple reflavor that I'm shocked I don't see it anywhere else. Really, I think there's one other wyvernborn I found on Google one time, and they had copy and pasted it from the Quelmar wiki.
Well, I think part of that's from the sort of history for Dragonborn from third edition, where they were like servants of Bahamut, and it was actually like
Mhm.
people that went through a ritual to become
Yep.
Dragonborn. So it just
Yeah.
like the wizard's original lore for it doesn't fit with wyverns being an option at all.
And because Wizards has sort of changed the lore on Dragonborns, it's fun. Coincidentally, we
Uh-huh.
have
Yep.
a version of the Dragonborn in the book called the Dragonkin, who are effectively the chosen people of the Platinum Lord Bahamut. So we've
Ah.
sort of so that if you've got the Grognards and they're like, well, I'm a Bahamut Dragonborn and I went through the process and I did all this stuff. It's like, yes, we have this in Quelmar, and we also have the traditional Dragonborn. You know, you can be both. You could be the 5e Dragonborn. You can be the 30e Dragonborn.
All right, yeah. I don't think there's many Grognards for third edition Dragonborn, but if there
It,
are, you got them satisfied.
uh, somehow it came about. It's in the book, so I don't even I my brain is drawing a blank trying to draw the history of where that one would have come from.
All right. Uh, well, I got one more question before I sort of turn it over to you for whatever else you wanted to
Sure.
cover. So you mentioned the anthology series that you're doing now with like one shots that you're sort of heavily researching to having like two characters show up together. And you mentioned not wanting to do like, oh, you fall into a portal and you show up here together. Um, and I was curious because you were doing a Swords of the Serpentine campaign,
It
right?
was.
Um,
Yes.
and the Gumshoe rules also have Time Watch as a way to sort of have that kind of like portal traveling thing.
It's true.
Well, it wouldn't be like a coincidence exactly, but you still could have something that's sort of like is thematically connected for the two characters that could work for that.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, the I will say this. The my goal was because I don't want I want them to all be the actual organic crossroads of where these stories can connect.
Hmm.
Um, However, that does not mean that time travel is off the table. Quelmar has a time travel god. It is a large purple dragon who transports people through time all the time.
All right.
But I did not want to use this dragon because that's again the easy, simple answer to just instant crossover. I wanted to show where the stories. I wanted to show that the stories were already connected. They already coexisted.
Right.
They just needed that little nudge to show explicitly. But um, in some cases, the characters that are connected. In some cases, I started from space, so I know that these two characters both come from Terrace. How can I connect them in a story? In some stories, it came from time. I know these two characters coexisted in the same year. How do I tell that story? Um, and in some cases, more rarely, but I've got a couple episodes for this. The characters are connected through a very explicit connection that the players had written. So in this season of Just the Queue of Us, I've got two episodes in which one character, one player, had another character they found on the wiki and built a descendant of that character.
Okay.
Um, and so I wanted to draw attention to that. It's almost like, putting a spotlight on this wonderful thing people are doing where they're building their stories on top of each other, they're connecting them.
Hmm.
Sometimes even in these cases, like the players don't even know each other. So it's just like to connect the generational stories, it's very hard to do without some sort of time travel. If they're not like immediate mother and child.
Well, a ghost would
So
also work.
yeah, yeah, I do have. I have several episodes I've done a ghost in to bridge that temporal gap.
Uh-huh.
Um, but specifically for at least one of these, I have used that time dragon and sort of pulled it out and had the character get thrown back in time to encounter almost Back to the Future style their ancestor uh, that they built. They wrote on the wiki. They were like, this character is a descendant of this character, and so then um, it was the chance for them to meet unknowingly, even realizing like neither character knew they were the ancestor or descendant.
Ooh.
The players knew and the audience knew and I knew, and we're all laughing and enjoying like all of the little remarks and jokes about, wow, you're really easy to get along with. You were just like, I feel like I've known you my whole life. um, and so we
That's
really
pretty
enjoyed the
cool.
meta-ness of that. And something like Time Watch, okay, well, I mean, this is like late night talk show stuff, but like I have always wanted to do a Time Watch Quelmar group of like iconic heroes from across the ages that team up from no matter what era they're from and tackle some pretty big bads and jump through time. And Time Watch is I'm a huge Gumshoe like missionary. I'm the one who introduced Gumshoe to the Quelmar community, and I was like,
Mhm.
everybody play this. And now we have a Gumshoe community campaign that plays on our Twitch channel on Tuesdays.
Awesome.
Still Swords of the Serpentine.
Well, yeah, that's the best
That's
one
the
for
big one these
fantasy.
days.
Yeah.
But like I want to do some Time Watch.
Yeah, I mean, Quelmar seems perfect for it with like the enormous amount of like relevant events you have to mess with.
Yeah, and established events, right? Like if you're a player and you just want to go visit these quote unquote famous events in time that you know about, but like you can't tell a story in all of them. Um, like to me, a Time Watch campaign would I think I'd circled the idea in my head like I don't know for 5 years now. We've all got stories like we really want to do, but it's like the timing's not right
Hmm.
or the opportunity's not there. And
Yeah.
and a Time Watch campaign, I think I had a name for them and everything. It was like Questers, and it was like Quelmar, Universal, something something time, Ordinance, uh Regency. I don't remember what it was, but it's so funny you say that because I put together more thoughts than you'd think on exactly that concept, and it never happened. Um,
Well, I'm thinking about doing it for my own campaign. Within like a well, no, just got two other campaigns I want to do first, but uh,
exactly.
whatever soon means in that context.
Yeah. Yeah. Where are you based out of? You can cut this from the script if you need
No,
to,
I'm in
but
Davis. No, it's fine. Davis,
oh,
California.
nice. Cool, cool, cool. Wait, that's UC Davis is in Davis, California, right?
Yep.
We've got two people there. We've got two people in Davis, I think.
Oh, cool.
I- but I don't know if you would know them if you don't go to the UC Davis.
I don't anymore. Are they at the
Yeah,
Dragon Club there now?
I can ask. I'm not sure. I'll shoot a message. They'll almost certainly know. I mean, that would be hilarious if you guys did frequent the same stores or something. And
No,
then,
no, sorry. The Dragon Club is the on-campus like gaming community. So I mean that's what I was in when I was in the university, but
I
no, I'm not.
gotcha.
I'm not connected to it anymore. My group is actually the same group I've been playing with since I was 9 years old, so it's
That's
not changed
incredible.
much.
That's a beautiful thing to have. That really is. Yeah, it seems like it's becoming more and more rare.
But yeah,
People who have their childhood group.
internet play was what made it able to stay that way because we're
Yeah.
all spread
Yeah.
out now.
No, I just sent the message. Her name's it's Kelsey Glazer is her name, but I don't know. Again, big campus, big city. It's almost certainly unlikely. I could get the two of you to connect if you're looking for if you're looking for players. I can send Kelsey your way.
Uh,
Um, but but it's
it's
funny. It's because it just goes again to show like Quelmar started in Maryland in my mom's basement, and now I've literally got people in your town
yeah, that's really cool.
telling stories in this world.
Well, I hope she has a good day at picnic day tomorrow.
I don't know what that is either, but I'll tell her that.
Uh,
I hope you have.
Davis has like the UC has a day in April every year that's kind of like a state fair kind of feel to it.
Okay, and that's tomorrow.
Yeah, and it's because it's an ag college. It has a bunch of like
Mm.
cool animal events. Each of the different departments kind of shows off and does something. So like the chemistry department does like a show where they do a bunch of like interesting chemical reactions.
She says picnic day is huge, so it must be even bigger than I'm picturing.
Oh yeah. I mean the town has like a 70,000 residents. Picnic Day typically has about 300,000 people coming to it.
That's insane.
Hmm.
That's like quadrupling the size of the town.
Yeah, I mean it's like a state fair. Like a state fair gets people from all over coming to
Oh,
it for it.
yeah, I was gonna say when you said a state fair, you meant like a real state fair. I was
Hmm.
picturing just like a big college fair.
No, I mean UC Davis is already a huge college, because
Yeah,
half of the 70,000 are students. Um, but yeah, yeah, it's an enormous amount of people that come for it.
yeah. Well, Kelsey's running the Icewind Dale campaign in Quelmar right now, so she is taking full advantage of our little Arctic continent, building out a bunch of things on it.
Okay, cool.
Um, it's fun when people it's fun to adapt things like that to Quelmar because sometimes it's like it'll throw things into Quelmar, but then you're like, I don't want to just take the Wizards of the Coast thing and throw it into Quelmar. So then you sort of get to reflavor it in a way that leaves your imprint. Um, she's done some of that. I haven't looked too deeply at it, but she's built some things out in Brem, the ice continent,
Hmm.
that relate to the Icewind Dale and the what is it? The Queen? What's the big snowbird? The it's the mascot on the cover of the book. It's everything I know about Icewind Dale is literally just what I've read on the wiki about Kelsey running Icewind Dale.
Okay. It's my experiences from the Drizzt novels. I never played the
Mm,
games, so I'm
yeah, yeah, yeah,
not quite sure what you're
yeah.
talking about with the bird. I know there's a dragon and there's a crystal.
But yeah, no, that's really funny. That's I was not expecting to be able to tell you that I have someone in your town running Quelmar right now, but it turns out I can.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You said there was two people though. Is the other person like in her
Uh,
campaign?
Kelsey's partner
Oh,
is
okay, gotcha.
yeah, also in is uh also runs they ran our most recent Spelljammer campaign. And they also were the person who ran the not Strahd, the Barovia but without Strahd
Right.
campaign.
Okay.
So they married Kelsey. They both came to Quelmar separately. Found, I guess. Hold on. Let me rephrase this in case it's a story you want to put in the podcast. So, one of the reasons we really love connecting people is just seeing where friendships can take you in life and what they can help you grow and be and do. Because we have Kelsey and Craig both joined Quelmar from two completely different groups. Craig was a friend of a friend of a friend, and Kelsey was a friend of Rachel, my partner. And when they both came into Quelmar, they were playing in different campaigns, different stories. And then when COVID hit and everybody was playing online, we got to connect people from the different chapters more closely. And Craig and Kelsey, for one reason or another, they played at enough tables and then they liked each other's company enough that they wound up getting married. They proposed at a Quelmar Con. Um,
Oh, that's
Big
really
surprise
nice.
for literally everyone. And so then, yeah, so they got married and now they're both out in California, um, which is lovely.
Okay, cool. What is she doing here?
She's an astrophysicist. She
Oh,
studies. Yeah, she's UC Davis. I guess has a really good physics, science, space program.
it does. It means she probably also knows one of my other friends.
Small world, small world.
Yeah, definitely. But getting back to more D&D stuff, the the Time Watch stuff, I've actually been writing like a supplement for Time Watch to try and make it more like friendly to like fantasy storytelling. So I could send you that if you're interested.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. I mean, I'm more than happy to take a look. And if it's like something you want playtesting on, Walmart's got a big playtest chapter. We have a lot of people who will playtest games. Both we used to have a program called Playtest Tuesday where we ran um, we had new works that were being written and coming out.
Uh-huh.
Uh, we would we would play test them in Quelmar to demonstrate for the game writers how adaptable their story was or not, or to demonstrate for them like how are people going to homebrew this and adapt it for their worlds. Um, because Quelmar is far from the only world where people are taking multiple RPG systems and putting them in one place.
Mhm.
And so that was one of the things our playtest focused on was here's how it worked for us. If this is something you want people to be able to do, Blades in the Dark the whole thing takes place in one city of Duskfall. Super easy to drop into any world. And they say it in the book. They're like, this is Duskfall. Drop it in your world. Do whatever you want with it. It's just one city. The whole game takes place in.
Right.
And some games aren't as friendly like that. Some games are like, the mechanics are built into the rich history of these people and their rivals across 10,000 years on this specific river that's 10
Yeah,
miles.
like Pendragon would be one that I feel like is difficult to like I can see how it would work to drop that into something else, but it's very much set up to play like Camelot, King Arthur.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Pendragon we haven't had in Quelmar. Numenera we haven't had in Quelmar. There's a couple that are very, very specific. That it's I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just nobody's really taken the challenge or taken up the stride.
Yeah. Or
Um,
otherwise just why would you bother? Like the Lord of the Rings set like
yeah,
RPG?
and that's the thing is like some of these are you can separate from the setting. So like the Genesis system is very famously it powers a couple of Star Wars role playing games,
Hmm.
but you're not going to want to adapt the Star Wars role playing game as much as you want that mechanics. And so the Genesis system also has a mechanics book that's system agnostic or setting agnostic. So you can just pull the cool rules and mechanics and put them in any world. You don't have to have droids.
As long as they're Warforged.
Yeah, exactly. You can make them proto forged.
Well, I think that's most of the points I wanted to hit. Did you have anything else you wanted to add? Feel like we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about?
No, I mean, all I can say is that this shared craft that we all take a part of, you and me and all of your other guests and all of the people at Gen Con, you know,
Right.
everyone, it is so much more precious than even we might suspect. And it's its ability to change lives just through world building. I'm not saying the tabletop part of it, I'm not saying the game playing part of it, I'm not saying the character building part of it. I'm saying that the world building, the shared storytelling of the location and the stories inside of that spot. I think a lot of people are quick to jump to creating new worlds every time they want to do a new campaign. Specializing a new planet for every one shot. I think there is just something very precious about keeping to one campaign and watching it grow and organically seeing where human beings take it and what they do to it. That is a joy that not everyone in our hobby has had the chance to witness. And I encourage anyone watching, if they are the sort of person who likes to create new worlds for every adventure, to just think about what might happen if you connect your adventures in one land and you see how those stories are woven in one fabric and what that can do for you and your friends and your people. Because back then when we were all crushing sticks and stones together and building fires, what we did was dance around the fire and sing a song together in a chorus. And then, admittedly, we sang a different song and then a different song. And that is precious too. That is perfect. But if you sing one song and you continue to build on that song, build on that story, like Homer's Odyssey, until it is one massive, beautiful narrative, you'll discover something new. You'll discover something precious that you may not have seen before.
Hmm.
And that's my advice to game masters and world builders everywhere.
That's very well said. Um, my usual sign off question for people is, do you have any DMing advice you give to people? But I feel like you just did that.
And also, my other advice is that if somebody wants to play a Navi, just don't let them do it. It's just give them something. Just flavor up a gift, and you'll be fine.
I feel like a Goliath might work better for that because they're supposed to be big, right?
That's true. That's true. Exactly. Flavor up a Goliath gift,
Yeah.
alien Goliath.
Give it a tail.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show. This is really good.
Yeah. No, no problem. It's been a joy, and it's also been really great just talking about it. I don't talk about it a lot. I don't talk about my position of legacy, and what it's been like to watch the world evolve from my perspective because I'm too busy helping everybody else build their world from their
Mhm.
perspective.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Taking a step back is always helpful for that kind of stuff.
that's been lovely. Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, James. Good night.
Thank you so much. You have a good night.
Quick reminder that I'm looking for people to go on the show. So if you or someone you know would be interested, please direct yourself or them to gocorral.com/SDS. That's GOCORRAL.com/SDS.